The domain of attack is boundless. It can happen from anywhere because of the interconnectedness of the internet.
We go through life almost every moment with some element of risk and reward. We cross the street, there's a risk that we're going to get hit. We get on an airplane, there's a risk of a crash. It's just a constant trade-off, but more often than not, we do our homework, we look both ways on the street, and we navigate life. But when it comes to the subject tonight of cybercrime, I'm not exaggerating it, but I would say to us that if we're not prepared, if we haven't got countering strategies, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Providing access to the world through these smartphones, through social media, without any boundaries or direction.
Some of the most vulnerable are seniors, young adults, but I'd also just say the level of sophistication happening now, when they can take a still picture of your granddaughter or grandson and clone their voice and have that person arrive to you on the screen and start talking to you. We're at an unprecedented level of crime.
This is not someone that's going in person with a balaclava on into a bank. They're committing it in other countries out of our jurisdiction where we can't reach.
And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Not so much to strike fear, but my hope that we take away from tonight, raise our awareness, and more importantly, walk away with some smart countering strategies that we can use not only to protect our own assets, but the people that obviously we hold very close to us. So let's bring up the panel.
Hi, it's Tony Chapman. Thank you for listening to Chatter That Matters, presented by RBC. If you can, please subscribe to the podcast. And ratings and reviews, well, they're always welcome and they're always appreciated.
On this special episode of Chatter That Matters, Margot Denomme, a former Crown Counsel with over 20 years in criminal law, Milos Stojadinovic, our cyber expert from RBC, and Detective Sergeant Colin Organ, a seasoned law enforcement officer specializing in cybercrime investigation. Colin, we were talking earlier, I know you're very senior in the police force, but just give us a sense of what's happening. Is this truly a wave that's growing almost at a tsunami level in terms of these kinds of crimes against humanity?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with what you're saying from the police perspective of what we see. And again, I'm with York Region, but although we can be confined kind of geographically, anything with cybercrime is far from that. So that's what they're doing to try to defeat it. But we see the cases going up and up and up, and more people victimized, very vulnerable people that are affected by this. And to the point where, seniors losing their homes, being kicked out of their homes, it's taken over because they've been scammed or put trust into someone that they shouldn't. So
can you paint a picture of a story so we can personify it, personalize it, of a senior that kind of went from thinking that their retirement was a beautifully paved speedway and then overnight their life turns upside down?
It was a scam not known to them. They signed some paperwork, on a door-to-door scam that they thought nothing of it. Over a quick check for their water heater, and they didn't realize they were signing loan documents and mortgages. They had their home, beautiful house in Richmond Hill, all paid off. Unbeknownst to them, there was about $2 million put lien onto their house, and that ultimately led to they lost their house. We were working on trying to find them emergency housing through our resources, through the community and so forth. And that's someone that thought they were set for retirement. Their house was paid off, and it's just horrible to see someone go through. And you want to just say, wave the magic wand, this isn't fair. And the reality was everything we tried, they still lost their home, an entire life that someone's affected.
Maybe I'm just caught up in, the CSIs and the Hollywood folklore, but I would say in the past, there was a certain amount of different crimes. But is it fair to say that with this type of crime that is changing, it's getting more sophisticated, it's getting more complex, just when you think you've figured out their model, they're reinventing it?
That's a tough one for me to admit. The reality is they're always a step or two ahead. Those involved in these crimes are some of the hardest working people you would ever meet. If they used it for good, they could do extraordinary things, but they don't. They can adapt. They overcome obstacles. The second we come up with a strategy to stop it, They learn how we stopped it and they change before we even know it. So it's always that catch up. You briefly touched on the AI and stuff like that. It just makes it even harder for us. And you said, this is not someone that's going in person with a balaclava on into a bank where they're leaving fingerprints or so forth. A lot of these, and I can talk about one, is it's happening. They're committing it in other countries out of our jurisdiction where we can't reach. So it's definitely difficult.
We were chatting before and you talked about the math. You said how many thousand cases and how many officers that are available. It sounds to me almost like that fairy tale story of the little Dutch boy trying to stick his finger in the dike.
We spoke of it. I mean, I'm in charge of our financial crimes unit. Put in perspective for all of York Region, I've got 5 teams with about 25 to 30 officers and investigators. And last year we were over 7,000 cases. And that's not to talk about the dollar value. That's the amount of cases that you're trying to deal with on a level of volume that you just have to do the best of which ones you can. So it's definitely overwhelming for sure for the officers, but for the victims as well. You know, the reality is 7,000 cases, it's very important to that person, but it might take a couple weeks. It might take a long time for an investigator to get a hold, even to find out, you know, we can't recover the money, which can be devastating for people, but it's the reality that we have to deal with.
And how is AI and technology serving to your advantage versus just simply to the criminal's advantage?
We're trying to catch up with that. It's difficult from the policing aspect. The sensitivity of the information that we keep or the access we have. There's a lot of loopholes we have to go through in order to even introduce AI and so forth to work for us, because right now it's who do we want to have access to some stuff if that was subject to a data breach or anything. So it's things we're constantly trying to look at right now. I know we have a number of organizational projects that are trying to utilize AI. We're bringing in a program now where we have students, the new young minds, to kind of work with us and try to figure out how we can kind of overcome this or come up with some different programs to try to combat it.
A big part of the narrative through the whole election was this sense of catch and release. We even had unions, probably for the first time, police unions supporting the Conservatives. These crimes against humanity, when you are successful in capturing somebody, do the courts view them truly as a crime against humanity, or is it more, that was just a one-off?
We understand the constraints with the courts, but to be honest and upfront, it is frustrating. I come from a background with human trafficking and robbery squad and stuff like that. We even see violent offenders being released, and then coming to the financial crime world, you do see that the reality of it's categorized as a non-violent crime, when in reality, my investigators are the ones constantly on the phone, email, dealing with someone. How do you deal with someone that now is thought they were financially set and now they're in peril, their housing is at risk, everything. There is a large impact, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it either. We've unfortunately had victims that have, because of the financial strain, it's led to self-harm, it's led to suicide, disappointment with families, and everything. So it's that side that we're trying constantly to have the courts be cognizant of this is not just a non-violent offense. This has a long-standing impact on victims.
I've also read that when it comes to seniors, they're often so embarrassed that they don't want to share it with the police or even their family.
Absolutely. Like, that is 100% true. Generally, anyone that's caught up in this, right? It's they estimate only 5 to 10% is actually reported, and they had, I think, 108,000 reports last year. So to put that in perspective, and it is a shameful thing, especially for someone that now may have really financially impacted their family because they got caught up in it. They're forced into quick decisions. These criminals know what they're doing. They know how to pressure you into situations. There is that level of shame that people think, I can't believe I fell for this.
Now let's hear from the brilliant mind of Milos Stojadinovic, our cybersecurity expert from RBC. Just give us a sense. I know you're quite a modest guy, but you're very senior. I would argue RBC is one of the best in the world at trying to counter this. So just give us a sense of what you do for a living, and then I can ask you a couple questions.
My background is largely in what we call adversary emulation, or perhaps a little bit more informally, offensive security. So I have built the majority of my career breaking into governments, organizations, defense contractors, you name it, and using my skills of offense to inform how we should design adequate and appropriate defense. So by attacking organizations and institutes, we understand where are their gaps, where are their weaknesses in their environment across people, process, and technology, and implementing that change. On the other side, I have a threat hunting team, which sets the hypothesis that there are threats inside of our environment. There are threats that are targeting our clients. They actively try to hunt for those threats inside of our environment and in our digital channels. And lastly, I have a threat modeling team that integrates the thought process of security into the products and the solutions that we build. So we don't think about security as an afterthought. We think about it as something that's part of the journey.
Do you ever think how much you could have made on the other side?
So
I'm not suggesting this. I'm just curious because, I mean, in my demonic mind, I'm going, I'm sure they're paying you a lot of money, but you're really good at what you do.
yeah, I mean, you sound like my little brother because you ask me that question all the time. But look, the reality is that ethics is a large part in what we play, right? So in my role, I really have one thing. If you strip all my technical skill sets away, I have integrity. If I compromise my integrity, I obviously can't work in this industry. Right? Not to mention there's top secret clearances and all the other stuff that happens. But I have a deep desire to want to help people and protect people. I don't believe in victimizing people. I've seen friends and family around me become victims of cybercrime or even traditional crime. Like most people in life, I've been a victim of crime as well. So it's just, it's not in me, right? It's just one of those things I think you're either born to do or not to.
And what got you into this? Because it is, I would say it's arguably, it's a fairly young field, but it has grown in sophistication almost exponentially.
It's just sort of how my brain works. I am the perpetual asker of why. When I was a kid, I used to like take apart watches and clocks and stuff and put them back together. I just have an innate curiosity for how things work. And I find that when I know how things work, I can then hypothesize and think about how could you potentially make this do something it's not supposed to do. So for me, it's almost like a second nature thought process. And that I think is the hardest thing to teach when I look for people in this role. Like I can teach technical skill set, but natural curiosity to understand how things work or to take a look at a box and find a different way around a problem. That's the hardest skill set that we have to find. So very young age, I got really interested into hacking stuff when I was a kid. Thankfully didn't get into too much trouble. It really kind of intersected with this becoming a really popular industry because I almost went into physics, but cybersecurity was just turning into a thing. And I went, wait, I could take this like computer skill set I have about breaking stuff and actually do something with it. And the rest of it kind of writes itself.
So paint a picture for us. What is really going on out there? Because obviously RBC and all of your clients are all massive targets. So just open our minds to the seriousness of the threat.
I kind of like to sort of summarize it as the industrialization of cybercrime, right? So 15 years ago or so, if you wanted to target a company or target, someone of wealth, you had to like know all this stuff about how to target them, right? You had to know how to do reconnaissance and how you might get inside of the environment and how do you persist in that environment and how you move around it and how you get access to the data. And that has become commoditized in many different ways. So these days, if you fancy the idea of being a ransomware threat actor and holding organizations for ransom, you don't have to know how to write ransomware. That's sold as a service now on underground markets. You can get 24/7 support, where you can literally talk to someone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to get support for your malware. It's a big business model because what happens is the people who are authoring the malware, the ransomware, are taking a cut off of anything that the ransomware their clients effectively are implanting. And then on the other hand, you have, for example, threat actors that focus on initial access brokering. So they may, breach organizations or even, people of wealth into their systems, and they just sell that access to the highest bidder. So if you don't know how to compromise and you don't also know how to write ransomware, but you've got maybe a sliver of that skill set, if you have the funds to get started, this is how you can kind of approach that. And that's why we're seeing the scale grow up massively. That's why virtually all of us don't answer phone calls anymore that aren't from numbers that we know, because we can almost be sure it's going to be a scam. We get text messages all the time asking us to go on links. It's because all of this has become commoditized. And now you can just pay really pennies on the dollar to enable this stuff from someone else that offers it as a service. So when you get that thought process of like hackers and cyber criminals are like people with hoodies in their basements, they're not. The real crime has very much so stepped into cybercrime, and this is organized, it's sophisticated, and they're making tons of money. I think we opened up the conversation with this being a $10.5 trillion problem globally. And There's also increasing nation state involvement and support in this, right? It's not unknown, for example, that if you live in a country that's non-allied with another country and you target their citizens or their corporations, you have virtually no chance of facing any consequence. And some countries actually even encourage that.
Is it fair to, because the other thing I was reading about is that some of those leaders actually also take a cut.
I don't know that anyone's admitted to that on paper, but I mean, yeah, that's how most of crime in general works, right? So, and there actually are nation states out there that are conducting crime for their own gain, right? DPRK is well known for this, right? If anyone remembers the Bank of Bangladesh heist where they stole something like, I think it was $900 million through SWIFT. They ended up only losing about 90 million of it. They ended up laundering the money out through casinos in Macau, but that was all the North Korea, really, the Democratic Republic of North Korea. They are using that money to fund their government.
What happens to this money when somebody grabs it? $10 trillion is a lot of money to launder.
I think that's the hard part, right? Is there's steps to this, right? And we won't make it an educational course on how to move funds and launder them. But effectively, one element is gaining access to funds. The other element is kind of separating those funds and kind of moving them around and then layering them into what looks like normal proceeds. But increasingly, a lot of these funds are moving towards like cryptocurrencies, right? They're not part of the same standard regulation, but these people can leverage that wealth to still, do what they need to do, purchase the things that they want to purchase. And that kind of leaves them largely outside of the regulated space that the rest of the world operates in.
How much do you think, and maybe this is an unfair question, but, they talked a lot about the housing market, certainly in Vancouver, was propped up with laundered money, the stock market. I mean, how much do you think of the assets that we take for granted that we're going to retire on are under threat because the fact is that they're overpriced because this 10 trillion has to move to something that looks normalized?
It's very difficult to determine authenticity of documentation or origination of paperwork that comes out of country, right? And it's increasingly more difficult in the world of AI, where you can take a look at real samples, have AI models build a lot of this out for you. So I wouldn't be surprised at all to imagine that some of these funds could be coming from illicit sources and propping up artificial inflation in areas where it shouldn't exist.
So Margot, we're going to go to Margot Denomme. Margot was on my podcast a while ago, and she was the inspiration for doing this evening because a former Crown attorney sees a lot of things in court, and that led her to creating this book and really focusing on children, especially with what we consider to be smartphones. So Margot, first of all, talk a little bit about your experience as a Crown attorney and what you saw and what caused so much concern, especially when it came to Canadian youth.
When you start as a Crown attorney, you start dealing with youth. I guess it's where you can cause the least amount of damage when you're starting out. And I would see them time and time again get in trouble with the law. You look at their behavior, and it's easy to get angry about the behavior, but when you saw the pre-sentence report, when you saw the youth and what was happening in their life and really looked at that. I was never a Crown attorney that thought every child should have a criminal record. It was, how can we address this in a societal way and help this child to get on a better track? Because often that's not their choice. It's poor friendship and whatnot. There was one common factor, and that was self-esteem. I lecture about this now because it really is the foundation of all of us, but especially children. And now parents are putting technology in children's hands before self-esteem and a sense of self has even been built. And then I had my own daughters and started to notice what they were looking at social media. All of these images of people that quite frankly didn't exist. And this was 12 years ago. And this isn't going to end well because we can't have a whole generation of kids comparing themselves to people that are making them feel bad. So I wrote children's books and started to go to schools and educate kids about the dangers of comparing themselves to people in media that didn't exist. And in the lessons was all about the foundation of self-esteem. All I could see were these headlines in the last 5 years about children's mental health crisis over and over and over, and it didn't seem like anything was happening. So I quickly pivoted from my role with the Ministry of the Attorney General, and I started raising awareness about digital dangers.
When we chatted in the podcast, we were dealing with Harrison Haynes, who was a young boy and insecure and kind of lived on his video games. And next thing you know, he was approached by another male, and one thing led to another, and it almost destroyed him. What I loved about you when you joined the podcast, however, is you said, You got to think of that phone like you think of handing over keys to a car. Talk to us about that, because that metaphor makes a lot of sense, because I know parents are pestered at a very early age to get their kids a phone, very often with very persuasive arguments. You'll know where I am, Mom and Dad. But talk to me about what you feel is the dangers. You mentioned initially they haven't got a sense of self and self-esteem, but what else are you saying?
If you notice on the back of the book, I came across this brilliant quote from the former U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, that essentially said, giving your child a smartphone without any boundaries or direction is the same as giving them the keys to the car without any rules of the road. And his last line is, it's insane when you think about it. And it really is insane when you think about it. Cars are wonderful, but even with cars, they put in seatbelts and airbags and guardrails. But right now, we are saying happy 10th birthday, providing access to the world through these smartphones, through social medias, without any boundaries or direction. So when you think about the driver's handbook, and it was intentional that it mimics the driver's handbook, one, because everybody's familiar with the look and feel of a driver's handbook. Two, we expect kids to get their license around 16 years old, which is what we're trying to get this movement towards, delaying smartphones.
I'm noticing that some school systems are doing it. I think Australia or New Zealand just completely banned phones up until, I think, the last year of high school. But you got to be getting a massive pushback because kids' identity is wrapped up in that phone. So how do you counter that when they think the world's within arm's reach of desire? If you're denying them that, they basically, I have no social currency. I can't fit in. I can't laugh at that person's TikTok video. I mean, how do you challenge that?
This is where the collective action comes into play, because it has to be all hands on deck. Jonathan Haidt, I don't know if you've read The Anxious Generation, but he speaks of 4 foundational reforms. 1, no smartphones before 14, no social media until 16, phone-free schools, and back to a play-based childhood. And how you counter that is if we worked collectively, because we all have to be on the same page, we can turn the tide of the mental health, children's mental health crisis around. He says within 2 years. I think that's incredibly optimistic to turn this tide around, because there are options. You can get a flip phone. You don't have to have access to the world.
Let's continue this conversation. Colin, have you noticed since you joined, I think it was 20 years that you mentioned you've been on the police force. You started as a constable, moved your way up to a very senior level. Have you noticed a change in the civility of the people you're dealing with? And do you point it to what Margot might be saying is the issue, is the fact that we're wrapped up in the phones as opposed to humans and humanity?
We see it, especially in the world of, robberies, home invasions, everything. Offenders are getting younger and they're getting more and more violent. And you're seeing they have access to all this stuff at young ages. And again, it goes back to, the consequences of it at the time. Are they getting catch and release and just reoffending and so forth? And there's pressures obviously with that too, knowing, criminal organizations use youth to kind of carry these out as well. They know to target them, and they're susceptible. They're very impressionable and so forth.
And Milos, going to you on this, we've become a country where we really believe that other people will take care of us. The government's going to take care of us. Corporations, my credit card's going to take care of me if I get in trouble when I'm traveling. Do you see that from a bank's perspective, that when there is a crime against humanity, your clients are saying this is on your watch versus things that they should be doing to watch out?
Sometimes there are scenarios where, we've dealt with clients where we've tried to intervene and say, hey, this is a scam. And if people are so far down the mental trap, they're convinced that you're trying to stop them from gaining some significant amount of money. And then, of course, a week or two later, it dawns on them the reality, right?
And when we return, our focus shifts to how we can fight back and protect ourselves in the scary world of cybercrime. Some questions from the audience and my takeaways.
Hi, it's Tony Chapman, host of Chatter That Matters. You lock your doors, you protect your valuables, but how about your online activities? Cybercrime has become a household word, one of the biggest concerns facing businesses today. A big shout out to RBC for creating The Vault, an online cyber safety playbook packed with tips and steps you can take to counter cyber threats. Visit rbc.com/cyber and download your playbook today. Helping you protect your online activities? Well, that matters to RBC.
I lecture about this now because it really is the foundation of all of us, but especially children. And now parents are putting technology in children's hands before self-esteem and a sense of self has even been built.
On this special episode of Chatter That Matters, former Crown attorney, best-selling author Margot Denomme, Milos Stojadinovic, our cyber expert from RBC, and Detective Sergeant Colin Oregon, who leads a team of law enforcement officers specializing in cybercrime investigations. So how do we raise the awareness? Like, what can we walk away with to say that we're at least taking some steps to counter it? I mean, as you said, we don't maybe answer that spam phone call anymore and believe that a Russian bride's right around the corner or the Nigerian prince is going to send you $1 million. Maybe we're getting a little better, but I'll go each one of you to talk about what do we need to do to kind of set up our own defense so that we're not just relying on RBC or relying on the police force. What can we do?
A couple of basic things that I would say that people can follow to try to improve that hygiene. Don't use simple passwords and don't use the same password for stuff. Everyone looks at me and goes, yes, Milos, I know. But I tell you, I have the stats. I see what happens in breaches. People reuse passwords all the time. They reuse passwords in their personal life, in their business life, which leads personal breaches to turn into business breaches or vice versa. They reuse patterned passwords. So they'll change like the last symbol from like an exclamation mark to an @ sign to whatever's down the row because it's easier for us to remember. Creating these unique items that are hard to break also ensures that you're not victimized down the line. Yes, rotate them, but pick complex ones. Don't memorize them. Put them in like a password manager or somewhere where you can reference them when you need to. And then the other element too is to stop and kind of exercise caution when something doesn't feel right. Social engineering is a thing that people hear about. And I've sat through a talk. I remember this very vividly. I was in front of like 1,500 insurance folks and I was talking about social engineering. The whole talk was about social engineering. And someone interrupted me mid-talk and was like, that's not possible. I would never fall for that. Like, you can't engineer me to do something I'm not supposed to do. And my response was, do you have children? Because if you have children, I guarantee you've been social engineered. The kids are great at that. That's what they do to get what they're trying to do. And we all do it in innocuous ways. Stop and think. Pressure is being asserted that maybe feels like an urgency is being created. Stop, think about what you need to do. If you're not sure yourself, have somebody that you phone to get a second opinion on, right? And think about. I do this a lot with my family members who are not super tech savvy. Like, if you got something, give me a call, shoot me a text message. I'll give you a sanity check before you make that decision.
And is there an app that would automatically rotate your passwords? Like, has technology not come up with there's some kind of biometrics or that protects us?
There's always some trade-off generally, right? Security and usability are kind of like this linked dimmer switch, right? The more secure something is, the less usable it generally becomes. And vice versa is also true. So there are technologies that exist. Some sites and platforms and applications do support it, right? I would encourage, if any of you use like Gmail or any of the popular kind of mail providers, like use the multi-factor authentication or the passkeys because they are considerably more secure. There are other alternatives, but it's taking time to adopt in a secure way. Just because, we say, hey, use a passkey or use a certificate, it becomes a question of storage, right? Where are you going to put it, right? If you put it somewhere where someone else can steal it, it's no safer than having a password. So we're just now getting to the point where we have computers that have hardware that's designed to kind of keep this stuff on a chip that makes it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to extract. And you can effectively prove that you have some of this material by doing some mathematical challenges, but it'll take time for things to get up to speed. I'm going to add one more point, actually, that I think people often overlook. If I asked everyone, I'm going to do a quick little poll, if that's okay. Quick poll. If you had to think about like your most important account that you have digitally, right? How many of you would say it's your banking account, like your banking client card password? Yeah, almost everyone, right? What happens when you forget your banking password or your password for virtually anything online? You go through that password recovery form that asks you for your email. and then you get a link to your email to reset your, so yeah, the most prized type of credential that you have is your email, because your email is often used to reset every other account that you have linked to your identity. So yes, banking credentials are super important. I'm not saying they're not, but also think about the protection for your email, because that's often a mechanism that's used to link back. And if you're not savvy with that, breach of your email can now suddenly lead to someone just programmatically going through all your messages. Oh, they bank with this bank, or they use this service. I'm going to see if they use the same password on that service. Or if they don't, I'm going to reset that password, delete the email before you read it, and gain access to that account.
Margot, why don't you give us a little bit of advice that their birthday girls should be thinking about, or advice for us to be thinking about with our children or grandchildren?
You spoke about how we change this. How do we change the trajectory, especially amongst young parents, young children? I really equate it to what Mothers Against Drunk Driving did to change the culture of drinking and driving. It took time, but it was a collective effort, and they did it through education and awareness en masse, which has really caused a significant change in that culture when you think about it. I'm thrilled to announce that I'm working on a curriculum right now with social emotional learning, grades 3 right through 12. We have to educate young people. I'm not anti-technology, but we have to start to talk about their digital footprint early, the predators online. When I was writing the guide, I realized just how insidious it is, from brain development to mental health to child predators to TikTok challenges, plus all of the criminal offenses that impact our children. So when you really see it all in one book, you say, wow, maybe we should delay. This is the big challenge about getting the phones out of the schools. It's not so much the kids. The kids are actually happy once the rules are in place, because it's a lot of pressure to have a phone. It's the parents that are calling the office to say, I want to get a hold of Jimmy and find out what time I pick him up for soccer.
How do you think history will treat the social media barons? Because there's a handful of them that are really corralling so much of the wealth in the world. How do you address that? As part of it, society has to put more pressure on social media to say, as much as you like monetizing that data that everybody excretes, that we've got to find a way to push back?
It's a massive, massive concern when you saw all of those people supporting Trump. You know, all of the SOS parents that have lost children to social media and died by suicide, and all of these horrific things that have happened. And they're on Capitol Hill and they're lobbying for laws. And we aren't even close. Legislation is never going to keep up with technology. So to your point, we have to hold big tech accountable. But big tech, it's so political.
I'll add just a couple of points to this, because I think just having some basic conversations with people to understand that, like, we all kind of know in the real world, there's no such thing as free lunch. Like, everyone's heard that one before, right? That is doubly true on the internet. There's no such thing as free products. Gmail's not free. Anything you use, it's not free. You pay for it with your data. That data is far more lucrative than you spending $4 or $5 a month, right? So when we talk about kind of tech billionaires and, some of them almost cresting trillionaire at this point status, or at least at one point, they're building algorithms and they're hiring some of the smartest scientists in the world to solve an optimization problem. The problem is, get someone to use the platform for as long as possible. The longer they use the platform, the more ads they're served, the more they interact with, the more you can monetize their behavioral information, as well as directly monetizing their time, right? So when you start to think about it from that perspective of, like, it's not free, you're paying with your data, and we start to feel the effects of that more, I think we'll start to think about what this means and how we instrument laws to protect against this and to regulate what is and isn't okay. I think a big sort of landmark incident that happened a couple months ago, I'm not sure if anybody read about this, but GM was found selling some of their car driving statistics to an insurance company in the States that was starting to raise rates for people that were perceived to be driving dangerously. And no one ever read the end user license agreement when they bought their GM car and got the connected drive and understood that GM actually were giving GM the right to sell their information to third parties for their own profit on top of selling them a car. Then that insurance company buys that data and goes, oh, wow, Bob, you drive double the speed limit all the time and you're driving like a maniac through school zones. We're not going to insure you, or we're going to charge you double the amount. Suddenly people start to kind of feel it to be a little bit more real.
So Colin, my last question, and I'll open it up and get a couple of questions from the audience. And then, but If anybody saw the Game of Thrones and they're trying to hold the North Wall and they all start climbing over that wall, and it just seems like there's no way we're going to ever counter this. How do you keep the morale of our police force, which is the bedrock of society? How do you keep the morale up knowing that exponentially this crime is increasing and at the same time, we do have this revolving door?
The motivation is in the people that you can help. So even though there is, overwhelming amount of cases, the ones that you can really make an impact on and help and get back, or like we say, that horrible scenario of someone losing their home, you can intervene beforehand. But it's those ones that mean a lot to the officers that are doing it. We're doing this job, similar. We're not doing this to make money and get rich. It's because we generally want to help people. So that's the big thing with the officers. They are, as my job as a leader is constantly reminding them, it seems overwhelming, but you guys are making an impact every day that you come here, every day that you work, and you are making a positive impact on people, which is what they really want to do.
So let's open up 3 questions. So go ahead.
What's next in cybercrime with the introduction of AI?
We're probably 2 to 3 years away from deepfakes being commoditized to the point where it's virtually impossible for the average person to tell that they're not talking to the person on the other end of the line or on the other end of the phone call or the video call because it looks like them and it sounds like them. Might sound controversial, but 2 years ago we had nothing and now we have very convincing stuff. And if you look at even what's open source, let alone what's available like commercially or on underground markets, like especially celebrities that have a lot of video or audio content on them, it's incredibly real. So we're on the precipice of what I consider to be an identity provenance crisis, right? So how do you prove in 3 years' time that you are who you are when you're speaking to someone you're not face to face? And then the question becomes how do we ensure the material that we create digitally can be authenticated, right? So there is some conversation that's being had about this in hardware manufacturers of cameras and other media companies that are looking at how do you confirm with cryptographic proof that something was generated. But we have to think about misinformation travels faster on social media than real information does. And in a world where we can't tell the difference between real and fake, imagine the impacts, not only economically, but socially, for being able to, spread misinformation that reaches millions of people that no one can prove is real or unreal in any kind of, immediate mechanism. So I think that's the big thing that's on the horizon with regards to cybersecurity challenge in the space of AI.
One thing that you can do today is develop a family safe word for exactly the reasons that you've just indicated. It's so important that you have a family safe word. So if you do get that phone call and it seems a little off, you can have that word that can keep you safe. That's something you can do today.
With how fast AI is growing, is humanity at peril?
A little off topic, but it's a great question.
As someone who's deeply passionate about like privacy and the digital world, we often think about this stuff when it's far too late, right? Like we talk about AI ethics when that ship has sailed, right? We talk about how we're going to regulate social media when it's been deregulated forever, right? I don't know that we're quite there. Wouldn't it be great if we lived in a world where all of our basic necessities were met and we got to pursue our passion projects and the things that we wanted to work on to enrich our lives and the lives of others around them? But there's also obviously potentially a negative of that. And it's, you have to be pretty ignorant to not realize that there's a lot of wealth being concentrated in spaces that control this technology.
The interesting thing that I'm most concerned about, because I'm very involved in AI right now, is our youth. Without purpose, which is what a job gives you, without a place to go, socialize, learn civil skills. If AI takes away those bottom rungs of the ladder and then the next rungs, we as a society are going to have a massive problem on our hands, because if you study history, civil unrest leads to anarchy. Another question here, yeah?
With so much deepfake audio and video out there on the internet and in our social media, how do we deal with what's real and what's fake?
It's challenging because it is it's a mental problem, right? It's people feel like, and they're conditioned this way and they're coached this way that, hey, people may try to stop you. They may intercept you. They don't want you, they want to keep you in the system is often kind of like what we hear being said, right? So, it is a challenge. This is where we're thinking about this digital provenance and content provenance, right? How do we prove or very, very quickly give somebody a capability to see, I'm looking at this, is this really published from RBC, or is this really RBC CEO, or is it really Mark Carney, or who else? Because the level of chaos and manipulation that someone can enact through this deepfake is tremendous. It's unprecedented, I think.
Just to wrap this up, what I'm so honored that we have people like this serving our country, because good and evil, it sounds like evil starting to run the table. And it's our only counter are people like you that find a way against all odds. 7,000 cases, only 10% reported. Margot, what you're doing with your career is as successful as well. You said, this is going to be my calling. I'm going to make a dent in it. You know, the fact that you could probably hack the Pentagon and the fact that you're doing it and saving us, it gives me hope. But I think the only way we're going to continue to give them inspiration and motivation if we listen to what they say in terms of our passwords, encountering, talking to our elderly, talking to our kids, and really having these conversations. Because if we don't lead by example, I think that this thing will collapse, because there's a lot fewer than them than a lot more over there. So big round of applause for this fantastic panel.
Once again, a special thanks to RBC for supporting Chatter That Matters. It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening, and let's chat soon.
When you get that thought process of like hackers and cyber criminals are like people with hoodies in their basements, they're not.